The U.S. says it will accept up to 100,000 Ukrainians who have fled the violence of Russia's invasion. Nearly 4 million people have fled Ukraine in the past month, and more than 2.3 million have gone to Poland. Another 600,000 have gone to Romania. This is the fastest growing refugee crisis Europe has seen since World War II. CBS News immigration reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez joins me now for more. Camilo, the Biden administration hasn't given many details on its plan to welcome these 100,000 Ukrainians, but what do we know so far?
Hi, Scott. So far, this seems to be more of an aspirational goal as opposed to a concrete policy, and I'll tell you why. There are different immigration pathways that Ukrainians have to come here to the U.S., but they're currently very limited. There's the refugee process, but that program usually takes years to complete because of multiple interviews, medical checks, security screenings, and other bureaucratic steps. The U.S. has also said that it will only resettle Ukrainians who cannot be protected in third European countries. There's another program called parole that allows the U.S. to resettle people more quickly, but unlike refugee status, Scott, that authority and that classification does not allow the government to place immigrants on a pathway to U.S. permanent status and ultimately citizenship. There's also the visa process, but that also faces massive backlogs and processing delays. And it's also important to note, Scott, that for the current fiscal year, this administration set out to resettle up to 125,000 refugees fleeing war and violence across the globe. 5 months in, Scott, fewer than 7,000 refugees have actually been resettled this fiscal year. And I think that illustrates the difficulty that the administration will have in meeting this goal of welcoming 100,000 displaced Ukrainians.
Well, you mentioned the lack of a legal path for immigrants, a legal pathway for immigrants, because of the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians who are flying into Mexico. They're flying all across the country trying to seek asylum. How are they being processed at this point?
For context, Scott, since March of 2020, both the Trump and Biden administrations have used a policy known as Title 42 to rapidly expel most migrants arriving to the U.S.-Mexico border without allowing them to request asylum and without screening them for U.S. protection. This is a public health measure that the Biden administration has kept despite criticism from immigrant advocates. However, according to an internal Department of Homeland Security memo that we obtained, officials at the U.S.-Mexico border were instructed, Scott, to consider exempting migrants with Ukrainian passports from this Title 42 deportation policy so they can seek asylum here in the U.S. We already know that hundreds of Ukrainian migrants have arrived at the U.S.-Mexico border in the past few weeks, and most, from what we understand, are being allowed to seek asylum. And this stands in sharp contrast to how other migrants and asylum seekers at the border are being processed because, as I mentioned, most migrants, predominantly those from Latin America, are being expelled to Mexico or to their home country under Title 42 without being allowed to seek asylum.
Camilo, a reporter today questioned the administration during the White House press briefing, asking about plans for refugees in other countries. I'm going to take a listen to this.
Many people have been advocating that what you are doing for Ukrainian right now is what you should also do for Ethiopia. As you know, tens of thousands of Ethiopians have been killed, millions have been displaced. Why not do the same thing that you do to Europeans, to Africans?
I don't have any additional detail on any plans there. Obviously, as we are focused on working to welcome 100,000 Ukrainian refugees here, that does not, eliminate work that's being done in other areas. I don't have any specifics to announce from this podium at this time.
Camilo, in that question is really a fundamental question. Is there a double standard in the U.S. refugee policy?
That's a critical question, Scott. Before I answer, I just want to note that the U.S. does indeed resettle African refugees, primarily from the Congo. But it is true that there are a lot of concerns about politics and discrimination plaguing the U.S. immigration system and policies implemented under Republican and Democratic administrations. A recent example of this, Scott, is the Temporary Protected Status Program, which allows immigrants in the U.S. to apply for work permits and deportation protections if their home countries are plagued by war, conflict, or natural disasters. The administration, Scott, just took 1 week to grant temporary protected status to Ukrainians here in the U.S. after the Russian invasion, but has yet to authorize this protection for Cameroon, Ethiopia, and other African countries, despite calls from advocates and Democratic allies in Congress. And these are obviously African countries that have predominantly black populations, and so advocates are concerned about this unequal treatment that they believe is being conducted right now based on where these migrants are from. And that is also illustrated by the Title 42 exemption that we discussed earlier for Ukrainians. Most Central Americans and Mexicans are being expelled under Title 42, but the administration is allowing most Ukrainians to bypass this expulsion policy and to seek asylum.
About these Title 42 border restrictions, we're expecting some further announcement about the future of the policy, which was adopted during the Trump administration. What can we expect in that announcement?
Yes, the CDC has to analyze this policy every 60 days to make sure that it is still necessary. Right now, the CDC director has until tomorrow to decide whether to continue, modify, or terminate Title 42 as it pertains to families with children or adults traveling without children, because remember, unaccompanied children have been exempted from Title 42 since the start of the administration. And we know that there could be some changes pretty soon, Scott, because there is a court order that will require border officials to either interview families to make sure that they are not persecuted or harmed if expelled, or could prompt the administration to end Title 42 altogether for this population, for families with children. And we also know that the Department of Homeland Security just recently started to vaccinate migrants in Customs and Border Protection custody after delaying those plans for more than a year. The department expects to start vaccinating thousands of migrants this week until the following summer. And this signals really rather that the administration is preparing for a potential end to Title 42.
Camilo Montoya-Galvez, excellent reporting. Appreciate you jumping in front of the camera, and thanks for your time.